I'm Zinnia, and I've been a doctor for almost as long as I've been Maverick's wife. We shared 29 years together, with all the ups and downs that come with a long marriage, but it feels like those years passed by in the blink of an eye. Our house, which was big and always felt warm, was full of life, especially when our two boys, Thayer and Ronan, were young. They were so different from each other, like night and day, but both brought their own kind of happiness into our lives. Maverick and I both worked as doctors, and we worked hard to create a stable and comfortable life for our family. Over time, we even bought a couple of apartments and rented them out to bring in a little extra income. Life felt like it was moving along just as it should, like we were on a good path. Everything seemed fine until one day, Maverick came home, and I could tell something was wrong just by looking at him. He looked pale and more serious than I'd seen him in a long time. "Zinnia, we need to talk," he said, his voice heavy and serious as he set down his medical bag by the door. "I had some tests done last week. The results are back. It's cancer, Zinnia." From that moment on, our lives changed completely. The months that followed became a blur of hospital visits, treatments, and endless hours spent in waiting rooms. Maverick fought as hard as he could, but the cancer didn't show any mercy. Watching the strongest person I knew slowly become weaker was something I could never have prepared for, no matter how many years I had spent as a doctor. One evening, as we sat together in the quiet of our living room, Maverick took my hand. His grip was weak, but his voice was steady. "Zinnia, if things don't go the way we hope, I need you to make sure everything is taken care of with the boys. The will is done, and financially you'll be okay." It wasn't long after that Maverick passed away. The funeral was quiet but respectful, with family, friends, and colleagues coming from all over to say their goodbyes. But when everyone left, and I was alone in the house, the silence hit me harder than I expected. The house felt so empty without Maverick. His things were still right where he had left them, but seeing them only made my heart ache more. A few days after the funeral, I was in the kitchen, trying to figure out what to do with all the leftover food, when Thayer stormed in. His face was tight with worry and anger, and Ronan followed him, looking like he wished he was anywhere else but there. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," Thayer said, getting straight to the point, just like he always did. I sighed, setting down the plastic wrap I was holding. "Yes, I know," I said quietly. "Your father left everything to me. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." Thayer slammed his hand down on the counter, making me jump. "But what about me and Ronan? We're his sons. It's not fair that we get nothing." Ronan, always the calmer one, tried to ease the tension. "Thayer, let's not rush into this. Mom's still grieving. We can figure this out without fighting." But Thayer wasn't having it. "Easy for you to say," he shot back. "You're not worried about the future like I am." I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of their words. "Your father and I built this life together, and he trusted me to handle things. But I hear you, Thayer. I know this doesn't feel fair to you." Thayer crossed his arms and raised his voice. "So what's the plan, then? We just wait until you think it's a good time to give us our share?" I felt my patience slipping. "Thayer, watch your tone," I snapped. "I am still your mother." Ronan stepped between us, holding his hands up like he was trying to referee the argument. "Both of you, please," he said. "This isn't helping anyone." "Mom, maybe there's a middle ground we can find here?" I rubbed my temples, feeling the stress of the situation building. "All right," I said after a moment. "Here's what we can do. Your father and I invested in those apartments downtown." I glanced at Thayer, who was still fuming. "You each take one of the apartments. They're yours now, to live in or rent out as you see fit. And from the savings, I'll give each of you $450,000 to help you get started on whatever you need." Thayer chewed on his lip, clearly thinking through the numbers. And the rest of Dad's stuff? The house? The money? That stays with me for now, I replied firmly. When I'm gone, everything will come to you. That's what your father wanted, and that's how it's going to be. As for Maverick's final wishes, I knew that I would honor them, just as he had trusted me to do. But dealing with the boys and their concerns wasn't going to be easy. We would have to navigate these new waters together, as a family. Even though our strongest anchor was no longer with us, I looked at Thayer firmly. He seemed like he wanted to argue more, but Ronan gave him a small nudge. Let's think about this, man. It's a fair start, and Mom's not leaving us out in the cold. Thayer finally nodded, though he still looked unhappy. Fine, he said through tight lips. But I want this in writing, Mom. No more surprises. Of course, I agreed. We'll get everything documented properly. As they left the kitchen, I could hear Ronan whispering to Thayer, "Give her a break, will you? She's doing her best." Thayer muttered something under his breath, but I didn't catch it. And to be honest, I didn't really want to know what he said. As I stood there washing the dishes, my mind wandered. I wondered if Maverick could see us now, and what he would think of how I was handling things. I hoped I was doing the right thing, but time would tell. And time, as I was learning, could be tricky. It wasn't always on your side. It was a sunny afternoon, one of those rare days that made everything seem like it would be okay, when Thayer brought his new girlfriend, Juniper, over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating for long, but it was obvious that Thayer was head over heels for her. You could tell by how much he fussed over her, which was not like Thayer at all. He was usually so calm and collected. When they walked in, Juniper had this air of confidence about her, like she already owned the place. She was dressed to impress, wearing expensive clothes and walking right into my living room with barely a hello. Her eyes scanned the room, taking everything in. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down, without waiting for me to offer her a seat. Thayer was sitting next to her, grinning like a love-struck fool. I forced a smile, trying to be polite. "Thank you, Juniper. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she said, then turned to Thayer. "Babe, make sure it's black, no sugar." Thayer nodded and hurried to the kitchen, leaving me alone with her. Sitting in my own living room, I suddenly felt like a guest. The silence between us was uncomfortable until Juniper finally spoke up. "So, Thayer tells me you're doing pretty well for yourself," she said, her eyes drifting over the decorations in the room. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know. My parents made sure of that." I nodded, not sure what to say. "That's good to hear," I managed to reply. Thayer came back with the coffee and handed it to her. She took a sip and wrinkled her nose. It's all right." Then, as if dismissing the coffee, she continued, "Anyway, we've been talking about our future. Planning ahead, you know?" "That's smart," I said, glancing at Thayer for some hint of where this conversation was going. But he just smiled nervously. Juniper set her cup down and continued, "Speaking of planning, we've been thinking about the wedding. You know, I want something special. Thayer has probably told you. I saw this beautiful place for the rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $60,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. $60,000? Just for the rehearsal dinner? Thayer quickly jumped in. "Mom, it's really important to Bella. We want to start things off right." I put my cup down, feeling frustration rising. "Look, that's a lot of money for just a dinner. Juniper, we need to be reasonable." Juniper's expression changed. Her face hardened, and she replied coolly, "Reasonable? Thayer says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something so important." I could see Thayer nodding along with her, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. He knew they were asking for too much. I tried to stay calm. "I'm all for celebrating, but $60,000 is way too much. It's beyond excessive, and I just can't justify spending that. Juniper stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Zinnia. I was very clear with Thayer about the kind of life I expect. Thayer jumped in again, trying to smooth things over. Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground? Something we can all agree on. But I had reached my limit. There's no middle ground when it comes to spending $60,000 on a dinner, Thayer. That's final. Juniper grabbed her purse and shot me a glare.
Fine.
If that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to reconsider some things. They left shortly after, leaving me sitting there, still trying to process what had just happened. The nerve of that girl, coming into my home, drinking my coffee, and then telling me how to spend my own money. It felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I hadn't been expecting. A few days later, I was out at the grocery store when I heard that Thayer and Juniper had stopped by the house again. When I got home, I found Ronan awkwardly trying to entertain Thayer and Juniper in the living room. The air was so tense that it made you want to walk right back out the door, but this was my home, so I had no choice but to brace myself and step in. As soon as I put down my grocery bags, Juniper, looking all dolled up as usual, handed me a piece of paper. Zinnia, we've thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've decided on. I hope this is easier for you to handle. I glanced at the list. It was surprisingly sensible. Kitchen appliances, some nice china, and even a couple of pieces of furniture. Relieved, I smiled and said, "This looks quite reasonable. I think these are wonderful choices." Thayer glanced at Juniper, his expression hopeful for a moment. But just as I was about to discuss where we could purchase the items, Juniper's expression changed abruptly. "Oh no, this isn't right," she gasped, snatching the list back from my hands. She rummaged through her purse and pulled out a different sheet of paper. "Here's the actual list." I took the new list from her, and my jaw dropped. This wasn't anything like the first list. This one included demands for an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, stunned. Juniper didn't flinch. "No joke, Zinnia. These are the gifts we expect. Only the best for our wedding." I stared at her, then at Thayer, waiting for him to say something, anything that would show he didn't agree with this madness. But he just stood there, silent, looking back and forth between us, clearly torn but saying nothing. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Thayer, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable." Before Thayer could respond, Juniper cut in, her voice rising. "This doesn't concern you, Zinnia. You just need to pay up and keep quiet." That was when Ronan stood up, his face hard with anger. "That's enough, Juniper. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave now." The room was filled with heavy silence as Thayer and Juniper gathered their things. Juniper muttered angrily under her breath as they left, slamming the door behind them. I sat down, feeling the weight of the entire situation press down on me. Ronan sat beside me, putting an arm around my shoulders. "We'll figure this out, Mom. But you can't let them bully you into giving more than you can or should. It's not right." He was right, of course, but I couldn't shake the worry about Thayer. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was heavy with unsaid concerns and fears for the future. I realized then that this was far from over. Things were only going to get tougher from here. In the weeks that followed, my phone rang constantly. Thayer called almost every day, and each call was more demanding than the last. His tone became more desperate, almost frantic. "Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Bella's family," he would argue, his voice cracking with stress. "You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here?" I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed against my ear, feeling a knot form in my stomach. Thayer, it's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Bella's expectations, you can't keep up with that. Not without going into serious debt. He scoffed, his frustration boiling over. What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like... I need more from the inheritance now. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. There, I've already offered to cover half of the wedding costs, up to $230,000, and give you a $10,000 gift. That's more than generous. But everything has to be agreed upon with me. No more surprises. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before I heard him let out a sharp, bitter laugh. That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me? I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. Because, Thayer, it's not just about the money. It's about making smart decisions and not letting yourself be driven by someone else's unrealistic demands. But Thayer wasn't listening anymore. The calls kept coming, the same arguments over and over again. I worried that the relationship I had with my son was slipping away and all over money. Each call left me feeling more drained and more uncertain about what the future held for our family. I replied, my patience wearing thin. It's not about the money, Thayer. It's about not feeding into this fantasy that's going to destroy you. He suddenly yelled so loud that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you. And just like that, he hung up. Months passed in silence. I tried to keep myself busy with the daily routine, doing my best not to dwell on Thayer. For a while, it seemed like there might be peace. But it didn't last. One afternoon, my phone rang, and it was my sister-in-law, Marigold. Zinnia, I thought you should know. Marigold's voice was hesitant, as if she didn't want to be the bearer of bad news. Thayer is flying all the wedding guests to Hawaii. He sold his apartment to fund it, and he expects you to find your own way there. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping, so I hung up, a whirlwind of anger and sorrow swirling inside me. How could he be so reckless? Before I could even process what Marigold had told me, Ronan walked into the room, his expression grim. Mom, there's something you need to hear. He handed me a small audio recorder. I recorded their conversation when they were here last. I thought you should know what they were saying. I pressed play, and the voices of Thayer and Juniper filled the kitchen. Juniper spoke first, her tone sharp. Your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet. We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her, and then cut her off. Thayer's voice followed, chilling and agreeable. Whatever it takes, Bella. I'm not letting her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear. I stopped the recording, my hands trembling. To hear my own son talk about me like that, with such cruelty, was too much to bear. The room seemed to spin as I tried to comprehend the depth of his betrayal. Going to Hawaii for the wedding wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I knew I needed to confront this situation head-on. Ronan stood by my side, both of us tense, but determined. When we landed and arrived at the venue, I was stunned by the sheer extravagance. Flowers were everywhere, lights strung up like stars, and music filled the air. It was like stepping into a fairy tale, but one that felt too perfect, too fake. As we walked into the gathering, I spotted Thayer and Juniper mingling with guests. They looked like the perfect couple, all smiles and laughter, but my heart ached to see my son so lost in this world of make-believe. Before I could get close, Juniper saw us. Her smile vanished, and she marched over to me, her high heels clicking angrily on the stone pathway. You shouldn't be here, she hissed, stopping just inches from me. Her voice was loud enough to draw attention. This is my day, and you're not welcome. I was caught off guard, stunned into silence. But before I could respond, her parents approached. Her father, a tall and stern-looking man, spoke first. Juniper, That is no way to speak to a guest, especially Thayer's mother. His tone was sharp, and I could see Juniper's face turn red with embarrassment. Her mother, looking just as appalled, turned to me with an apologetic smile. Zinnia, please come with us. Let's find you a place to sit. They guided us to a table at the edge of the event, clearly an afterthought. There was no proper setting, and I could feel the tension in the air. The ceremony started soon after, with speeches that felt hollow given the underlying strain. Then, out of nowhere, someone handed me a microphone. I stood, my legs shaky, but I knew what I had to say. I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future. I began, my voice steady, even though I was trembling inside. But I also believe in honesty and integrity, and those have been missing in the events leading up to this day. I glanced at Juniper, whose face was turning from pink to bright red. Her eyes burned with anger. I was asked for money time and again, in amounts no reasonable person would find justifiable. And when I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with being cut off from my own family and future grandchildren. My voice cracked, but I continued. Ronan, sensing my distress, stepped closer and put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I nodded at him, then pulled out the audio recording he had made. As I pressed play, Juniper's cold, calculating voice echoed across the room, discussing how they would milk more money out of me. Then Thayer's voice followed, agreeing to the plan, and even saying he was ready to leave me with nothing for the sake of his bride. The crowd started murmuring, the air thick with shock and disapproval. I turned off the recorder, the silence that followed weighing heavily in the room. I gave my son an apartment and $50,000, I said, my voice growing firmer, and yet it was never enough. Today, I'm making it clear, I will not be treated like an ATM or threatened. From this day forward, I am done. I wish Thayer and Juniper well, but I'm choosing to remove myself from their lives. The reaction was immediate. Juniper screamed, her voice shrill and wild. You've ruined my wedding. After everything that had happened, coming back home was bittersweet. In the quiet, I made a decision that even surprised me. I quit my job. After years of being a doctor and helping others heal, I realized it was time to focus on healing myself. The storms of the past had shaken my life, and now I needed to rebuild it, piece by piece. Ronan, bless his heart, had just graduated from art college and was full of energy, ideas, and ambition. With the $50,000 I gave him, he opened his own tattoo parlor. But it wasn't just any ordinary shop. His work was a stunning mix of art and skin, and people noticed. Before long, he entered tattoo contests and started gaining attention. Soon, his name was on everyone's lips, and his shop became a local hotspot. It wasn't long before Ronan expanded, opening more locations and building a network of tattoo parlors that tattoo enthusiasts flocked to. I would watch him sketching late into the night, his dedication obvious and inspiring. He was making something incredible out of his life, and it was a stark contrast to the chaos Thayer had chosen. You're doing amazing, Ollie, I'd tell him, my heart swelling with pride. It was during this peaceful time that Thayer reappeared. One afternoon, he showed up at my door. His eyes looked tired, and his shoulders slumped. He wasn't the sharp, ambitious man I once knew. Without waiting for an invitation, he sat down and spoke. Mom, I need to talk, he said, his voice weary, a far cry from the demanding tone I had gotten used to. I sighed, gesturing for him to continue. What is it, Thayer? It's Bella, he said, rubbing his face in frustration. She's driving me crazy. She wants more and more, and nothing I do is enough. I even got a second job, but it's still not enough for her. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but his words couldn't erase the past so easily. Thayer, I warned you, I said, my voice firm. I told you living like that with someone like her would only lead to ruin. I know you did, he admitted, his voice full of regret. But I thought what? I interrupted, unable to soften my tone after years of frustration. That the money would just appear out of nowhere because you wanted it to? Look at your brother. He started with the same amount of money as you, and he built something from it, without stepping on anyone. Thayer bristled at my words. Not everyone's like Ronan, Mom. I have rights to the inheritance too, remember? When you're gone, it'll come to me. That was the last straw. Get out there, I said, my voice cold and final. And don't come back. You chose your path. For a moment, he stood there, his jaw tight like he might argue. But then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, but I didn't feel regret. Ronan came downstairs, having overheard the last part of our exchange. Are you okay, Mom? He asked, concern written all over his face. I nodded and wrapped my arms around him. I am now, thanks to you. Let's just focus on the good we can do and the life we can build together. He hugged me back, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace. Despite the heartaches and the struggles with Thayer, we still had each other. And that was enough to keep moving forward. After Thayer left, the house settled into a calm I hadn't felt in years. During this quiet period, Ronan brought someone special into our lives. Her name was Callista, and she was everything Juniper wasn't: kind, humble, and genuinely caring. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship grew, and before long, they announced their engagement. Their wedding was the complete opposite of Thayer's extravagant affair. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony in our backyard. Flowers from the garden, homemade decorations, and a small group of close friends and family made the day perfect. During the reception, I pulled Ronan aside. You've chosen a wonderful woman, I said, my voice thick with emotion. He squeezed my hand, giving me a knowing look. I learned from the best. Life moved quickly after that. They sold the apartment I had given Ronan and used the money, along with some of their savings, to buy a cozy little house just a few miles away. One sunny afternoon, as we were having tea in their new living room, Callista shared some news that nearly made me drop my cup. Zinnia, we're expecting twins, she announced, her eyes glowing with excitement. Twins, I repeated, overwhelmed with joy. That's wonderful news. Ronan beamed with pride. We wanted you to be the first to know, Mom. We're so happy. Twins, I said again, letting the words sink in. The thought of being a grandmother filled me with a new sense of excitement. It was a whole new chapter of life that I couldn't wait to begin. As for Thayer, news from him became scarce. The last I heard, he had divorced Juniper. She had taken nearly everything and split, leaving him to start over in another city. Despite everything he had done, it still hurt to know that he was out there somewhere, struggling because of his own choices. One evening, as I was flipping through old photo albums, Ronan sat beside me. He noticed a picture of Thayer and me from years ago. Do you ever hear from him? He asked softly. I shook my head. No. After everything, he's chosen his path, and I have to respect that, even if it breaks my heart. Ronan put his arm around me. He's still my brother, Mom. Maybe one day he'll come around. Maybe, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. But for now, there was plenty to focus on, especially with those twins on the way. Ronan chuckled. Yeah, you're about to be the busiest grandma in town. We both laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. Despite the past, the mistakes, and the heartaches, this moment, right here with Ronan, felt like everything was finally as it should be. Life was moving on, and so were we, with new hopes and dreams just on the horizon.